How much of the Panthers improved through 1 week of free agency? Well, I'll tell you right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, the part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and yes, you guessed it, Friday, your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for watching the show here on YouTube and listening wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter and Blue Sky at Julian Council, because on Fridays throughout the offseason, I'm right here on the show answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions. So this is what you got to do. Either at me or DM me over on Twitter, or simply just at me over on Blue Sky to get your questions in for this week's edition of the weekly Friday mailbag right here on Locked On Panthers. Today's episode of Locked On Panthers brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins, and the NCAA tournament getting started in earnest tonight up in Dayton, Ohio. North Carolina Tar Heels controversially made it into the field facing off against San Diego State. I do not remember who's playing in the 16 game. But either way, that's going on. So go place your bets over on FanDuel right now. Now looking at the Panthers, as that's why you are here, let's talk about how much this team has improved offensively and defensively through 1 week of free agency. And there's one little draft tidbit I want to get to at the end of the show. Well, let's start off by talking about the Panthers' defensive improvement, which we all knew heading into this offseason, much like last offseason, Carolina needed to improve dramatically on the defensive side of the ball. And the hope is, like last offseason where they really attacked the offense, the Panthers can have the kind of defensive performance that the offense had in the final 9 games, not in the first 8 games of the season when they were trying to figure out, was it Bryce going to be the quarterback, Andy Dalton, then Bryce getting another opportunity, and then things finally getting off the ground and seeing that improvement out of their hopeful franchise quarterback. I still think that's on the table, whether he is going to be or not, but he's going to be the quarterback again in 2025. But Bryce Young playing really well. They want to get that out of the entirety of the defense this upcoming season with 2 franchise cornerstones and J.C. Horn, who all the week, that's how long it lasted for him to be no longer the all-time highest paid defensive back in history of the NFL, as Derek Stingley Jr. got $30 million per year there in Houston. JC only has a lowly, paltry $25 million per year in his extension that he signed here with Carolina a week ago prior to the beginning of the legal negotiating period. And Derek Brown also coming back, first year of his long-term deal he signed a year ago here in Carolina. But looking at the defense as a whole, you got to start up front. Defensive tackle, that was an area that I felt like they had to improve just on the defensive line across the board. We're talking about guys who have their hands in the dirt. Derek Brown coming back, that is going to be an addition that Carolina is going to account towards this free agency period, even though he was already under contract. But having him and A'Shawn Robinson back was already going to be a solid foundation, especially obviously having a top 5 defensive tackle in Derek Brown, a Pro Bowl the last time he was healthy fully in 2023. So Carolina just needed to add pieces around him and have those guys rotate. And they have done that by bringing in Bobby Brown III, who was a known run stopper in Los Angeles the last couple of years with the Rams. They brought in Turk Wharton from Kansas City, who really broke out last year as an interior pass rusher who can also step out to the outside and be a pass rusher that way. So that should help the edge rushing group here in Carolina as well. And you look at the offensive line a year ago, day 1 of the legal negotiating period, Carolina went out there and spent a bunch of money on Robert Hunt and on Damian Lewis. And Carolina tried to make a splash signing by getting Milton Williams. And it was going to be $26 million per year, which would have been a little awkward how someone who's never been a Pro Bowler, who's never played, I think, more than 47% of the snaps in the season was going to get paid more than your franchise cornerstone in Derek Brown. That did not work out. Fortunately for Carolina, they were still able to get guys like Bobby Brown III and Turk Wharton, and then even Pat Jones, we'll talk about momentarily, with the money that they would have spent on Milton Williams. So that group has absolutely improved. How good will they be against the run? We will see. But I do think with Derek Brown back healthy, with Bobby Brown in there as a nose tackle instead of Shai Tuttle, who has a new deal where it's the same deal, but he's taking a pay cut. He's going to be back in this year in a reduced role and probably he's better suited to be. Honestly, at this point in time in his career, I do think this will be a better run defense. And you can even see as far as the interior pass rush, A'Shawn Robinson had a career year last year. Derek Brown, Todd Wass, the defensive line coach here in Carolina, talked about how he wanted to turn Derek Brown into a pass rusher. I wonder what that really is going to look like down the line, but he's coming back to potentially be in that role. Turk Wharton as well, coming over from Kansas City. So 3 guys right there in the interior that you can feel pretty good about potentially getting some pressure there up the middle on quarterbacks this season. So I look at this defense, the area that's improved the most to me is absolutely, without a doubt, the defensive line, in particular the interior of the defensive line. Edge rusher, I don't really know how much they've really improved at this point in time. Jadeveon Clowney is coming back this upcoming season. I would not necessarily expect him to be better than he was last year. If you can say the same, as he's still an aging player and has talent, that would be good for Carolina. DJ Wonnum, you'd expect him to take a jump just based off the fact that he hopefully will be healthy for Carolina for the full 17-game season, or at the very least, play 15 games instead of the 8 that he played last year, after missing the first 9, recovering from that blood clot in his arm that was suffered back in the offseason in the spring last year. So Patrick Jones second comes in from the Rams, or from the Vikings rather. For the Vikings. Yeah, I got that one right. But he comes over, and it's very similar to what we saw a year ago when it comes to DJ Wonnum, where he is more of an upside kind of signing that Carolina's bringing in, where he had a nice season a year ago where he had 7 sacks as a career high and now has 12 sacks in his career. And he can come in and be someone who's still younger. This is his first real deal, 2 years, $15 million. It could be up to $20 million, depending on whether he can hit those incentives. I do think that makes the room better, but I still look at it and I'm not overly impressed by what they have. It could be really good if Clowney has a season like he had a couple of years ago in Baltimore, which I would not count on that being the case. But if Wonnum can stay healthy and get back to the 8 sack total he had in his final year in Minnesota, and then if Jones can carry over what he did last year in Minnesota here to Carolina and get 7 sacks, like that's 15 from that edge rusher group that you did not get a year ago. And then potentially you add somebody via the draft to be able to help as well. So I don't think that they've necessarily gotten that much better. They would have to, just adding someone who at least has produced, even though just one season has produced on the field, compared to where last year the third guy was DJ Johnson. And so far, he has not made much of an impact at all on the edge for Carolina. Linebacker stays the same, in my opinion. You bring back Josey Jewell, who, if he, like a lot of these guys, if he stays healthy, think he can be a good player for Carolina. He did have his ups and downs last year with the injuries. I think that obviously had to factor into it. When he was healthy later on in the middle part of the season, started to play well, then was out for the rest of the year. Trevin Wallace has a year under his belt. He did miss the final 4 games with a shoulder injury, which apparently he had taken care of this offseason. Dan Morgan, the Panthers GM and president of football operations, talked about how they really are excited about him. So I'm really interested to see how all that's going to play out with Trevin in there at that starting inside linebacker spot, presumably as Christian Roseboom. He comes over where he started a year ago in LA, and he knows the system. He knows Ejiro Evero. That's another tie as far as a player coming into Carolina who's worked with Ejiro or somebody on this staff before. And I've seen a reporting, I think it was Darren Gann of Panthers.com, where he's not quite sure what his role is going to be, but he's used to change and he's excited about the opportunity ahead in Carolina. If you kind of look at what they have now, you feel, I don't know if you feel as good as you felt last year because you had Shaq Thompson, and at least, this part of the offseason, if we're looking at it. But Shaq Thompson was coming off injury. You knew if he could stay healthy, it would be a good player for you. Josey Jewell had been in the scheme, had his best year of his career statistically a couple years ago when Ejiro Evero was a DC for that one season there in Denver. So you felt pretty good about those two. There's just questions about depth. I think now you feel at least there's optimism as far as what Trevin Wallace can do. And then when you look at Josey, okay, he's done it, just got to stay healthy. And then you're bringing in somebody like Roseboom, who is coming out the best year of his career. So it feels like just having 3 guys you feel really good about, or at least know you can play. That's probably a better way to put it than saying they feel really good about them. Now they'll tell you they feel really good about it. But as far as 3 guys that can actually play, last year you felt like you probably only had 2. So that there in itself could be an improvement. But I do still have questions overall of just how good these three linebackers are going to be for Carolina this season. Corner, that stayed the same. JC's coming back, of course. He's already going to be on a fifth-year option, but now he gets that extension. And you have Mike Jackson coming back, which I thought was the right move by Carolina. And he believes that him and JC can be the best tandem at corner in the NFL. And that's the kind of confidence that you want to see. Absolutely. And JC has proven when he can stay healthy, like last year, he can be a Pro Bowler and worthy of the $25 million per year price tag that Carolina gave him. Now it's comes down to living up to that deal, which I do believe if he can stay healthy, and that's still a very big if, because even the year where he was able to do it, missed the last couple of games, but playing 15 out of 17 or 15 out of 18 moving forward, that's going to be a full season for a lot of guys in the NFL and should absolutely take that. I feel good about JC. I'm interested to see what they may do in the draft. Did they look at Mike Jackson, whether that confident that he can be the starter, not just this season, but also next season in 2026. And if maybe they want to go find someone who could be maybe a more of a longer term option, but he's still young enough. So we'll see how that plays out. Then Shaw Smith-Wade going to probably get an opportunity to be the full-time starter there in the nickel. He took over the job late last season before season-ending injury. Sure tackler, had an interception. You got to feel good about where the cornerback room is right now, and probably even more improved as far as how they had cycling a lot of guys from Troy Hill to Dane Jackson, then to Shaw Smith-Wade, back to Dane Jackson at that nickel slot last year. So curious to see how that plays out. Then safety, Trevon Moehrig. It feels like that's got to be a big upgrade from what they had last year. Jordan Fuller did not pan out. You look at Nick Scott, he also did not play well when he was out there. And both those guys, a common trend, missed a significant amount of time, and that impacted their seasons. Xavier Woods didn't have the best year last year after being borderline a top 10 safety back in 2023. So bringing in Moehrig, a younger player who's been really good for Las Vegas the last couple of years. Looked like that to me, that's an upgrade. The fact that Monty Richardson had taken over a starting slot late in the last season, that feels like an improvement for what they had. So I do feel like the safety room has gotten better, just a lack of depth, and they're going to have to address that, I would think, via the draft as well. So overall with the defense, like with the offense last year, if you fix up front, because this is a line of scrimmage game, you can fix the line, that will elevate the rest of the unit. The defensive line, in my opinion, as far as the interior, has been dramatically improved. And bringing back Derek Brown helps a lot, obviously, duh. So they should be better against the run. And I do think with Turk Wharton, with what A'Shaun Robinson did last year, what Derek Brown potentially could do, adding in Patrick Jones as a potential upside kind of guy, getting a healthier DJ Wonnum should be a better pass rush. How much better will it be? That's still to be determined. I still think an area that they need to address moving forward into the draft. But defensive line, that has gotten better, which will make it easier for the linebackers who have questions heading into this year. Will make it easier for JC and Mike Jackson and Shaw Smith-Wade, and will make it easier also for Trevon Moehrig, who can come in and help as a run defender. Because you look at him, that was a real issue they had at safety last year. Sure tackler, Shaw, better tackler than what they had at that nickel slot last year. You look at JC, sure tackler, a lot better tacklers out there in the secondary this upcoming season than last season. So I do think this defense has gotten to the point where they should not be the worst defense in the history of the NFL as far as scoring defense goes. I'm not quite confident to go out there and say that they're going to go from dead last to a top half of the NFL unit, but they have absolutely gotten better through 1 week of free agency. How about the offense? Has not been a lot of movement over there, but they didn't have to do a ton offensively just based off of what they have put into the offense a year ago. Let's talk about that here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. And I've got my eye on a few underdogs this year. Can you call the North Carolina Tar Heels underdogs? I mean, they are favored currently by FanDuel to win the game tonight against San Diego State, but everyone's not happy. Very mad that they got in. Are they a Cinderella? Dare I say? And FanDuel they make it easy to get back with spreads, totals, and game props. Tournament games happening almost every day. There's always something exciting to bet on. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, when you win, when we all win, we get paid instantly. No waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. All right, back here on Locked On Panthers, kind of doing a reverse of last offseason. We'd always start off talking about the offense. Now we're talking about the defense, but let's flip over, talk about the offense on this segment as we look at how much the Panthers have improved since the start of free agency. Technically, it started last Wednesday, but we'll go back to Monday or week into since Carolina's been able to add players to their roster, or at least agree to terms of these players who now are going to be joining the roster here in 2025. As far as the offense goes, quarterback stayed the same. It really depends on the development. We're not going to be able to see how much Bryce has improved until we get to week one. Maybe the preseason. We'll see whether Dave Canales wants to play him in the preseason or not. I'm sure that'll be a hot button topic once we get to that point in time, but we'll save those conversations for August. We'll talk more about March stuff right now and project out to what things may look like in September. But Andy Dalton coming back, love to see that. I think it makes a lot of sense. And if week 3 rolls around and Bryce can't play, Andy Dalton's good for 300 yards, a couple of touchdowns, and can lead the Panthers potentially to a win, or at least have them competitive like you had them a couple of years ago in that loss in Seattle. So quarterback, I think they're all square there. Obviously, with Bryce can be the surefire starter in 2025. Dalton coming back as that veteran backup and a mentor to Bryce. And then Jack Plummer. He's still around as a developmental player, I suppose. So that's a good thing. So quarterback, it's really going to kind of bear itself out once we get to the season. Running back, they have absolutely improved at running back. I did think it was important for Carolina to go out there and to get a veteran backup behind Chuba Hubbard, with Jonathan Brooks going to be likely out for the majority, if not all, of the season coming up here in 2025. And then if you also look at the fact that Miles Sanders, who I wanted to see return, was not willing to accept a pay cut or a rework deal, he's exiting the door. Now you're bringing Rico Dowdle, who happens to be a North Carolina native, play down the road down I-77 South, down in not in Atlanta, but in Columbia for the Gamecocks. Now he's in there, ran for 1,000 yards a year ago in Dallas. Chuba Hubbard also ran for 1,000 yards last year in Carolina. Both these guys coming off career years. And Dave Canales, Dan Morgan, they have talked about running backs matter here in Carolina. And David said, even though we have not really seen him be about it, he has talked about being stubborn about running the football. When you have Rico Dowdle and you have Chuba Hubbard, both of those guys coming off career years, and you have your entire offensive line coming back, well, you should be stubborn about running the football, and that should also help your quarterback be better this upcoming season. And speaking of the offensive line, well, how could they have gotten worse if you bring back, well, not if, when you bring back Ike Ekwonu at left tackle, you got Damian Lewis back at left guard, at center, Cade Mays maybe, Austin Corbett maybe, Brady Christensen possibly, 3 legitimate options there with Mays, I don't know, maybe being the favorite. We'll see how it plays out. You got Robert Hunt back at right guard, Taylor Moton back at right tackle within a massive cap hit, but they're going to sit on it apparently. So that situation is figured out. Then I brought up the fact that Christensen's back and Mays or Corbett, two of those 3 are going to be backups, but all 3 of them, if need be, can start for you, and there will not be a significant drop-off like we had seen in 2023. And we saw that last year when Josh Nijman, who's also back as your likely backup right tackle again, and then Chandler Zavala, wherever you need him at guard, he's also back. We saw that when Damian Lewis missed the game, when Robert Hunt missed a game, when Icky missed a couple games, and when you saw Taylor miss a couple games, and Austin Corbett was out for the entirety or the rest of the season after the first half there, week 5 in Chicago, you didn't really see these guys drop off. Yeah, they had a couple of rough weeks later on in the season, but it happens. The defensive line talent in football nowadays is just ridiculous, and it's hard to expect these guys to be able to keep up with that athleticism all the time, especially when defensive linemen rotate way more than offensive linemen rotate, even in the NFL where there's a lower snap count, which you don't really need them to rotate at all. You can bring in a 6th guy and all that, depending on the package. But this offensive line, maybe they've stayed the same, but if they stayed the same, that's not a bad thing. I do think that they, just with a year under their belt together, that they will improve just because of the continuity. And that's such an important thing. And we have seen in the years where Carolina has been a complete dumpster fire, they've had no continuity, no depth there on the offensive line. When they have been competitive, they've had continuity and they've had talent on the offensive line. And they also pretty much stayed healthy. Last year, continuity, injuries, talent, all of it. And the expectation level or the standard really for that offensive line, it never really lowered. They were right there meeting it all season long. So I do think that they've gotten better. And in wide receiver, tight end, looking at wide receiver in particular, hard to argue that they've gotten better to this point, considering that, yes, Adam Thielen, he's sticking around, getting a pay raise for this upcoming season, the final year of his contract in Carolina. Xavier Legette, he's coming back. Now he's going to miss some time here this offseason, recovering from that foot injury that he sustained back in training camp that apparently bothered him throughout the season. The wrist is not the main issue. Apparently it's the foot. So we'll see how much time he misses there. And then you also have Jalen Coker coming back. Those are three guys that you can, feel, fairly good about heading into the season. I just think that Carolina needs to try to find another piece, and bring back David Moore would make sense to me. I brought up Elijah Moore on the show yesterday, talked also about Noah Brown as two pieces that could potentially fit in Carolina. And of course, we'll talk about receiver. And as a receiver in this draft class, I want to actually talk about here momentarily here on the show, as far as the draft tidbit that I have for today. I can't say they've gotten better. You can maybe say they've gotten a little worse just because they don't have anybody really behind those three. But I do think it's going to work itself out. And I do think that Bryce will have enough talent there at wide receiver to have success, much like he had towards the tail end of the season. Now, tight end, Tommy Tremble comes back. JT Sanders is still here. Jordan Matthews is on the roster. I think James Mitchell is an interesting prospect that was signed as a future. He's signed a futures contract in Carolina this offseason. Hard to say they've gotten better. I don't know if you can really say they've gotten worse right now, but that's an area that the hope is that, kind of like with quarterback, we won't really know how much Bryce has improved until we really see him play. And kind of like JT Sanders, we won't really know the same thing with him. And that could go the same for Jalen Coker, and that could be the same for Xavier Legette, and so on and so forth, as far as younger guys who are in their first full off season as professionals coming out for their rookie seasons, and all of that. So tight end, they're going to have to address it. And I do think they'll probably draft one in what is considered a very deep tight end class. Overall, offensively, I don't think they've gotten worse. They've maybe gotten a skosh better, but I don't know if they've gotten to the point where you feel really confident about that offense every single week. Offensive line, yes. Quarterback, I still think TBD. Receivers, still think TBD there. Running back, no, I don't have any concerns there at all. So they've gotten a little bit better, but how much better have they gotten as far as trying to pursue an NFC South division title, which it is certainly a possibility this upcoming season, as long as they can continue to build this roster out, and we'll see what the rest of the division does. I would not call them favorites at all right now, but it's the NFC South, and it's not really ever out of reach just based off of, it's the NFC South. Well, there's one little draft tip I want to go over here on today's show before getting out of here. I'll tell you what that is in just a moment on Locked On Panthers.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
We are closing in on draft season, and hell, you could make the case that it's already here after we've already gone through the first wave of free agency, and the second wave does not seem to be that intense at all, as this has been a very quick and not that crazy of a free agency period across the NFL. Now, for Carolina, they're aggressive, got a lot of good business done. Day one, going after some free agents. Day two, shoring up some guys that are already here on the roster. And then day three, adding even another piece. And it was pretty quiet day four, at least. Well, I guess the official day two and all of that. But looking at it, we are closing in on Monday. Next week will actually be a month away from the beginning of the NFL draft. And once we get to Monday, next week, it's going to be all draft talk on here. There may be some breaking news and all other kind of stuff that I'll address, but it's going to be draft. So that will give us, let's see, 1, 2, let's see. Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 straight weeks of draft talk. Going to try to get as many draft guests up here as possible. Cause honestly, like I have on Monday, I'm planning on giving you my initial thoughts about the draft and what Carolina should do. And I'm going to have to bring people on here because there's only so much you could say about something that's not going to happen still for 5 weeks after we really get into talking about it starting on Monday. So any suggestions that y'all have as far as what you want to talk about draft wise? Well, I mean, I'll look at every single position group here in Carolina like I did last year and where they may attack and what guys may make sense and all of that. So there will be plenty I can get to, but still it will be a lot trying to carry over the next couple of weeks. That's why I'm going to get some help from our friends out there and get some thoughts on what they think Carolina should do. But looking at the draft, wide receiver, that's been a position that we've talked about that has been brought up to me. And the main candidate that I feel like gets mentioned at 8 for Carolina by fans and even by people putting out their mock drafts is Terrell McMillan, the wide receiver out of Arizona, who's 6'4", big frame, and he ran his 40 at his pro day on Monday. And there were some discrepancies as far as what it was. Jordan Schultz, who had an interesting run-in at the Combine a couple weeks ago with Ian Rappaport. You may have heard about that at a Starbucks, which if you know who Jordan Schultz's dad is, that is hilarious. But he reported that Terrell McMillan ran a 4.48 40-yard dash, which when I saw that, it's like, okay, if that's the case, then yeah, maybe he's the pick at 8. But then some other people came in, like Albert Breer, and said that, no, that's not actually what happened. It was hand-timed, not by an automated system. I suppose that's what they do at the Combine. I don't know what they're doing at the Combine, but they don't have anyone hand-timing it. And the hand-time 40 was 4.54 and 4.55 and 4.57 on the stopwatches of 3 teams that Albert Breer talked to. So maybe there was one team that had him at 4.48. Maybe that's a quick thumb there or index finger. I don't know what finger you're using to stop. I think the thumb, right? Is that what you guys are using? I haven't used a real stopwatch in a long ass time since maybe like working summer camp. I don't even know why I had a stopwatch when I was working summer camp, but shout out to Camp Eagle Rock. So I don't know, looking more probably like a 4.5. Like in that, if you watch them play, and I don't know, looking at Terrell McMillan, I'm not surprised. Like I was stunned when I saw 4.48. It's like, whoa, he's that fast. Then I see the other reporting, and Jonathan Jones also came out from CBSSports.com and said that he had heard times between 4.55 and 4.59. So 4.48 or 4.48 simply is the outlier in this group. So he's a 4.5 to 4.9, and you're really hoping is more of like the 4.55 than the 4.59. But I don't get too caught up in all this. You're not going to be drafting Terrell McMillan to be a guy who's going to go down the field, stretch the field, be a burner. You want him to be a possession receiver. You want someone who can, I mean, he's big bodied. He can win those one-on-one matchups. And I mean, kind of similar to the guy we were talking about bringing in Carolina, at least I was talking about, who signed a massive deal in Cincinnati, T. Higgins. Like he may not get a ton of separation, but he's going to be able to get up there, make some plays for you. And you just got to put more speed out there on the field. And I think that's what Legette's supposed to be eventually. And I do think they probably want to add another speed piece there down the road, whether it's this offseason or next or whenever that's going to be. I still think that there's a worthy conversation when it comes to Terrell McMillan at 8. I don't necessarily love this wide receiver core as far as a wide receiver draft class, not the core here in Carolina, the wide receiver draft class coming up. And I've made that known, and we'll talk to some people out there and get their opinions on what they think about all of it heading into this draft cycle pretty soon. So thought that was interesting. Terrell McMillan, 4.55 to 4.59 with one outlier of a 4.48. But a guy who certainly is going to be considered for that 8th overall pick by Carolina, and maybe some other teams in the top 10 may want him, as well as you can never have enough receivers, but All-American, hell of a player. I'd be into it, but he wouldn't be my favorite right now. But I'll tell you who that is next Monday as we get fully into the draft here on Locked On Panthers. But that's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network. Hosted by yours, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe, follow the show free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter at Julian Council and on Blue Sky at Julian Council, because on Fridays I'm back here answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions. Either at me or DM me on Twitter, at me on Blue Sky, to get those questions in for the weekly Friday mailbag right here on the show. In the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole. As always, keep pounding, and I will talk to you on Wednesday.